From Chicago, welcome to 3Degrees Discussions. I'm your host, Mike Vasquez. This is a podcast devoted to the stories behind the innovators, entrepreneurs, and leaders in the 3D printing industry.
I had, a bit of a right-brained creative side, and I really enjoyed the people element and communicating. And she said, yes, get your metallurgical engineering degree, but that's going to be a launching point for you. You have that ability to leverage that and take that to a new level. I really didn't understand what she was saying at that point fully. I was like, oh, thank you. That sounds like a nice compliment. As I look back on that, she was 100% correct, because for me, the technical skills and that foundation is absolutely, it's a firm requirement for where I'm operating today. I have to be able to have a level of technical understanding. But my strength ended up being building those teams and working with the people to leverage that extra value.
That was Laura Eli. Laura is the leader of Advisor Services for the Barnes Globe Advisors. Prior to her role there, she was head of technology at GKN Aerospace, where she was responsible for the build-out of a new team focused on the maturation of laser wire deposition for titanium aerostructures, after negotiating a CRADA between GKN Aerospace and Oak Ridge National Labs. She joins the show today to talk about building high-quality multidisciplinary teams and the contrast of working for a large company and a startup within the additive manufacturing industry. All right, welcome to the show, Laura. Do you just want to start with how you got into the additive manufacturing space?
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me on. So additive manufacturing journey really started for me in about 6 years ago with the opportunity to stand up an additive manufacturing center for GKN Aerospace in the US. So I got to be additive manufacturing person number one in the US for GKN, and it was focused on laser wire deposition, directed energy deposition for aerostructures.
Awesome. And for those of you who don't know GKN, could you give a little bit of background on kind of what the company is and primary industry?
Yeah, GKN Aerospace is headquartered in England and in the UK, and it's an international company that provides both aerostructures and engine structures for major OEMs, so for Boeing and Airbus on the commercial side, as well as significant platforms across the defense side. So the division that I eventually got to lead from a technology standpoint in the US is about a $1 billion division. And I think it's about a $13 billion company. So large. And from a comparison standpoint, Spirit Aerosystems is a similar type as far as being a tier one or a super tier one provider to major aerospace OEMs.
And what was their motivation? I'm presuming they've done was that their first additive manufacturing kind of push, or
it was not their first. In fact, the aerostructures work grew out of work that was going on over in engine structures. So in Sweden, GKN had purchased a company that was called Volvo Aero, which was basically the aerospace portion of Volvo, which was about 1% of that large business, but it was quite big. And they are using laser wire deposition for adding features to engine structures. So they actually have product flying on A350 intermediate compressor cases. And basically their excellence in laser wire directed energy deposition grew out of laser welding expertise. So the bosses that they created basically started from hey, this borescope boss needs to be in a different location. And it was quite a ways into, the design cycle. And they said, well, why don't we just build it up with laser wire welding? It wasn't even really called directed energy at the time. And that grew into applying that across engine structures. The good thing is engine structure design engineers are used to having welded structures. So they're actually relatively open to a directed energy process because they're used to welds. The challenge that we took on in North America was, okay, we've got this understanding of titanium and Inconel and directed energy. Let's apply it to aerostructures. But that challenge was significant because you're going from engine structures, which tend to be big round things, to aerostructures, which tend to be big long flat things, especially where you're using titanium, in the aircraft, it tends to be critical. And the ones that would make the good business case is it tends to be relatively complicated. So the technology development that we're doing built on, the expertise that they had in Sweden with the engine structures, but taking on different challenges with managing, thermal distortion and path planning that were unique to the aerostructure sized parts.
And when you talk about standing up this operation, does that start all the way back to building a facility, selecting machines and technologies and materials and parts? Where does that process begin?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, it 100% started at just about ground zero on every single front. So building up the people and the team and building a technology development plan. So we did go through the process of basically looking at the entire bill of material for titanium aerostructure parts across the entire company and looking to say, hey, which ones could be good candidates? Anyone that's done that knows that's not the most fun process, nor is it always the most fruitful. But what it did is it allowed us to look and say, for aerostructures parts, there's common geometries. If we can build these building block geometries and have processes for them, then we can take those, put them together to build, geometries that make sense for aerostructure parts. So we did, when I say the word down select to any of my former team, they get a little shudder because we did a pretty massive down select matrix, not only for the equipment, but for the process. We didn't want to assume that laser wire deposition was absolutely the right process for us. So we did consider all of the deposition processes, plasma and wire arc and, electron beam, all of those. But we did end up selecting laser wire mainly because of the scalability and the flexibility of the process, being able to do both small melt pool and large melt pool, so that you could start tailoring the type of deposition for the geometries and the final application that you were wanting. So it was a lot of fun. It was also extremely hard because everything that I was doing in North America was the first time. Ranging from hiring people and even getting job descriptions created that fit the roles that we were doing, and getting people paid appropriately so that we could hire people in. But what we did from a facility standpoint is that we had our team based in St. Louis at first, but we signed a cooperative research and development agreement with Oak Ridge National Labs, the manufacturing demonstration facility. So that was quite a year worth of negotiations, but it was an $18 million CRADA over 5 years, which I understand that the team has either working on or has extended by now, to place the equipment there in Knoxville, Tennessee, and do that TRL 4-to-7 transition, leveraging their expertise in robotics and path planning and materials, and all of the things that they're focused on to help speed up that transition, with the idea that that piece of equipment, or perhaps just the developed technology, would then go into a manufacturing facility, such as metals machine shop, like the large one that they have in St. Louis.
And how did you go about selecting your team and building that up? Presumably you need metallurgists and designers and people that know robotics. So what was that process like? Are you drawing people in from other groups of GKN, or were you looking outside, or a combination?
Yeah, definitely a combination. So it was obvious from the beginning that, because we were starting with, you could go NASA technology readiness scale. We're starting at about a 3 on the TRL. So it was important that we had some blue sky thinkers that were happy working, creatively in the more of the inventive space at the lower TRLs. But what I also knew was that this wasn't going to be tinker toy technology that we were creating. I needed to have people on the team that also knew how to make things work in production. So I did a combination. They were members of actually the St. Louis team. There's one gentleman, and he's he's a guy that, fixes cars and can make anything run in his spare time, but has worked in quality, had worked in procurement, worked across the board. So what I looked for in my first couple of hires were the highly multi-skilled and experienced. So Mark, in that case, could do all of these different things. But he also was that one that kept our feet on the ground. So he used to kind of say, some of the guys, I wanted them to have their heads in the cloud for a bit, but I needed someone like a Mark and myself from the traditional manufacturing to grab them by the foot and yank them down every once in a while, to make sure that we had a plan that was leading towards industrialization and production, at the end of the journey.
How did the quality and, I guess, FAA part come into play with the development of the technology?
Yeah, the working on those qualification plans that then move towards that final certification. The kind of cool part, I don't know, people like to think of DED as being, quote, new. And I'm like, no, it's actually not new. So, Kevin Slattery, who's on the TBJ team now, was the lead engineer when they certified DED for a F-18 pylon rib with the Aeromet laser blown powder process. So that was, 15 plus years ago. So the path was there. And I think a lot of people also think with additive that certification is all of a sudden something different. And even the qualification supporting certification is all of a sudden something different. And I'd say, actually, it's not. The process is there. You've got to be showing your proof. You need to show your process stability, producibility, all those same pillars that have always been there for the traditional manufacturing processes. It's just the fact that now this is a newer process, so the burden of proof is generally higher. So the expectations from a data standpoint, from a material performance standpoint, all those things are much higher. But similar to what a lot of people have done, especially in the aerostructures realm, is, you look to do a stair-step approach where you say, okay, the first application we're going to go for is going to be a static structure, not too complication from a loading standpoint. And so early development was, let's hit those. But, always from a technology standpoint, you need to have your eye on generating the data and the properties for that next step. So the fatigue-driven applications, the critical things, the things that attach engines onto airplanes, landing gear, and wings onto fuselages are generally where you're using titanium, especially for any of the aircraft where you've got a lot of composite structures just to do that compatibility. So that was always what industry needs to be marching towards. But I think the main thing is just building up that database to be able to give confidence to the certifying authorities that, yep, we have a plan, we're going to follow the plan, and here's the data to show that long term this product is going to be good, to perform to that application requirement.
And do you think that's easier or harder inside of a big company and organization like GKN? I know we'll get into kind of your current work and in a bit, but you've subsequently worked on with a large number of companies and in different capacities. Kind of how was the qualification challenge easier within GKN because you had structure already, or being able to talk to the aviation authorities or look at past projects that had utilized the technology where that wasn't necessarily starting from scratch?
Yeah, I think there were portions of it that were absolutely a blessing, and then there were a few that were definitely a curse. So the good part about being a part of a large company like that is there were a huge amount of resources out there, whether it was on the engine side or the aerostructure side. There were people with design capabilities as well as the quality. So one thing that was great is we do these technology reviews, and you'd build a committee for your technology review that had a variety of people on it. So they would be from different countries, they would be with different backgrounds, and it really, really helped. I mean, it was hard sometimes because they're asking questions that maybe you're not ready to answer. But it made it a more robust process for saying, hey, are you ticking these correct boxes? Those types of things. I think the other thing is, having, a known name within the industry. When you call people, they know what your business does, and they understand that, you being involved in those conversations, whether that's with the FAA or otherwise, that name carried weight, and it made it easier to have those active conversations. So I think that big company bit was great in that space. Some of the curse side of things was really just well, we do things this way, and thou shalt do it this way. Well, when you're developing a new technology, you might be breaking the mold for how return on investment is calculated, how you even quote jobs, you're building up material versus taking it down. So there were different parts of the business that sometimes it was a really, really hard thing, where I felt like I spent more time evangelizing to explain what additive was and why it was different, to help take people on a journey early on, just to get them on board with what the technology could do, and most importantly for them, how it could support, the business.
Right. And so you moved on from GKN a few years ago. What was the next step after that?
So I had the opportunity after the AM Center to lead technology for GKN, which was a lot of fun. It was challenging, but for the Aerostructures North America division, but it gave me some perspectives across, composites, some other metallic technologies. But through that, I had the opportunity. I had met John Barnes. I was actually a part of a panel that got to interview him for a role at GKN. And I think he commented on me grilling him about friction stir welding at the time, because I'm sure that's what was on my mind. But he called me up and said, "Hey, I'll be in town for AMUG in St. Louis. Do you want to catch coffee? And if John Barnes asks you to coffee, you just better look out. You just never know where it's going to lead." So he described this team, the Barnes Global Advisors, and what they were doing, and what his goal was, and also what type of help he needed for his team. And a lot of that was around starting to put some processes in place and doing people leadership, helping him shape the team. And of course, these are all things that I really love, because I love the people aspect. I love being creative. I love variety, and I love not being bored. And he certainly promised me I wouldn't be bored. So I ended up making that leap. So my role now my title is Advisor Services Leader, but essentially I lead, kind of John's right hand for, those customer engagements, putting together our requirements and our proposals and how we're going to bring value to the customers, and then organizing the team to go execute and deliver that value.
And how was the jump from a huge company to a small company?
It was rough, but exciting. It's that typical, it was kind of funny. I don't know why it is that I felt that, I don't know, I felt like I was far enough along in my career that I wouldn't have that 6-month break-in period like everyone does with a new job, but I did. And so it was humbling. Early on, it was also because the company was only a year old. And so we didn't have that many processes in place. So a lot of what I was learning at the time was learning John, learning his kind of approach to things. And, I felt like a little bit of a fish out of water. I went to my first Form Next, like a month into my employment there. And I also was jumping in and running a business down in North Carolina at the same time. So I was taking on a president role. I was trying to learn, the TBGA business, doing all of these things, at once, while still doing a lot of travel and still trying to decompress from all the craziness from the GKN standpoint. And so I liked what I was doing, but there were certainly, challenges there. I knew I'd made the right decision, but that first 6 months was definitely a big transition period.
And kind of taking a little bit of perspective, when you were kind of in school and thinking about your career early on, did you have a particular direction that you were thinking about? Was it a big company, small company? You always wanted to work for a startup, or you were thinking of big company? How did your thinking evolve with your own career?
Yeah, I think early on, I had some fantastic advice from some family friends. So I benefited from growing up in a town, that had an engineering school in it, because I got to go to the engineering science camps, and I always knew I wanted to be an engineer, but I learned what kind of engineer I wanted to be. But one of the women that I had an opportunity to work with, Darlene Ramsey, she pointed out the fact that I wasn't, quote, the typical engineer. Not dissing typical engineers because I love them and work with them very well. But I had, a bit of a right-brained creative side, and I really enjoyed the people element and communicating. And she said, yes, get your metallurgical engineering degree, but that's going to be a launching point for you. You have that ability to leverage that and take that to a new level. I really didn't understand what she was saying at that point fully. I was like, oh, thank you. That sounds like a nice compliment. As I look back on that, she was 100% correct. Because for me, the technical skills and that foundation is absolutely, it's a firm requirement for where I'm operating today. I have to be able to have a level of technical understanding. But my strength ended up being building those teams and working with the people to leverage that extra value. So my role is not to go, 10 miles deep on a particular area. It's to understand when we need to do that and who the right person is to do that, for the customer. So as far as the size of the business, I don't know. My grandfather was an entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur, always, make $1 million, lose $1 million, start over again. So I think that is, probably in our family DNA to a certain extent, but I'm also a rather risk averse person. So the idea of going to something small and unknown was a bit of a leap for me. But now that I know it, and made the transition, I'm like, oh my gosh, why were you so scared of that?
Right. And I guess as your roles have shifted or evolved within the Barnes Global Advisors, you get to do something slightly different every day, or have different conversations with prospective clients or even within the team. So I'm sure the conversations that you have kind of keep you on your toes.
Absolutely. I mean, there's not a day that goes by where I'm not learning something new, talking about something new, or having a huge amount of variety. Fridays have become our crazy days, and we had one, and I was listing out and I was looking at the conversations we had that day. And I was just like, wow, like I couldn't possibly had more interesting variety of conversations. We talked with a company about a large group about qualification for nuclear applications. We talked with commercial urban taxi companies where, noise abatement and weight are super important. Then we talked to an equipment manufacturer on their next generation equipment strategy, really focusing in and giving them some tough love on production needs and industrialization. And that was just one day, right? So to say it's not boring is an absolute understatement.
And how have you found, kind of through the pandemic with limited interaction face to face and some of the conferences being changed or canceled or gone online, the shift to more Zoom meetings and phone calls, has that helped with some of these conversations and kind of getting people together more easily, that everyone can jump on a Zoom call more easily than being in person? Or are there challenges to kind of not having as much face-to-face conversations?
Yeah, I think it's double. We've seen it create opportunities for us, and we've also seen it, obviously throw some challenges out there. So for our internal team, we're already remote. We're spread all over the US and some peppered around the world. So we did do some things like having a half-hour happy hour generally on a weekly basis, just to not talk shop, but just have fun and be silly and make fun a little bit for our internal team. So that was really important for us, and it was a nice outcome of this global situation. From a business standpoint, We didn't see much of an impact. We definitely turn on our cameras all the time now. So you're craving that as much direct interaction as possible. So cameras on has definitely been a way for us to reach that level of connection. But the other thing that we saw is that people realized, like, we were going to do some, we've got the training side of the business where we do a lot of on-site workshops and, working through things in a very collaborative fashion. Well, when you have a pandemic, it's not like, oh, we're going to push this off for 2 months or 3 months. If you don't find a way to do it virtually, it's not going to happen for 9 months or a year, depending on how restrictive that, that company or group policy was with respect to bringing people on site. So it actually created a reason for us to innovate in how we were doing both consulting and training workshops. And so we've done a lot of, instead of doing a 1 or 2 day on-site workshop, now we're doing, 2-hour series of, interactive workshops, those types of things where we've just had to innovate. And we're using the platforms that we have, and we're continually coming up with new ideas to find a way to keep people engaged and to still have those conversations and to have the focus that you need, but to do it in a, completely virtual and online format. The areas where we've seen the biggest slowdown, of course, are things where they want us to come on and do a facility, on-site visit. You can't walk the shop floor without just actually walking the shop floor. But I think with some of those, and we have one coming up soon, I think where Kirk's going to be doing that, we're at a point where people have their policies in place, and, they're doing some significant testing, and they compartmentalize their facility and those things. So they have processes in place where they feel comfortable doing safe visits. So I think it's exciting to get to the point where they're opening up a bit more, and we can still have some strategic engagements to help customers in an on-site fashion.
And over the next 6 months to a year, what are you most looking forward to in terms of your career, your projects, your team? Are there something that's dates you're circling on the calendar for things to move forward?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of things that we have going on internally that I'm personally excited about. I mean, I love interacting with our customers. Customers are number one. People have always been number one for me. It's just so interesting. You get to know different people, you get to know different perspectives, and I personally gain something from each of those interactions, both technically and just from a personal standpoint. But one of the things that we're doing internally that sounds super mundane, but it is a big deal, is we implemented a new software and project and financial and accounting management system, which has been one of our strategic goals, which is to get us to gain traction and get us to the point where we have better data visibility. So it sounds like, oh, that must be it's entering hours and doing project management. But one thing that we found is we didn't quite have that data from the business standpoint to feel confident in our predictions as far as resource planning and level loading, and at which point might we need to hire more people and expand. Are we keeping our consultants gainfully employed? All of those things. So we're in the midst of that project, and by the end of this year, I feel like we will have gained this significant new level of business data visibility, and it's really going to take us to the next level with respect to how we can run our business and how we can keep our team engaged and happy.
Excellent. And kind of last question here, if you're kind of in the position of giving some advice to someone kind of graduating with an engineering degree or even starting college with a look towards manufacturing or 3D printing, what piece of advice would you give them?
Do it, for starters. For me, I love manufacturing. I love seeing how things are made. Anyone that has that curiosity when you see a product and you say, how is this made? A career in manufacturing basically allows you that chance to truly understand that, learn how airplanes are made, learn how heavy machinery is made, learn how, oil and gas rigs are made. There's so much learning. And there's this concept sometimes that this is hard or it's dirty. And like, I love that part of it. I love to get my hands dirty, both in reality, but, metaphorically as well. Let's dig in and solve some real problems. So from my standpoint, if you're a young engineer and you love solving problems, manufacturing, there will always be new problems to solve, and there'll always be awesome learning to get from that. And, if you are building your career in that, building a diversity of experience is huge. And I have a young woman that I have been mentoring back from my GKN time, and now we're good friends. And, one of the things I talk to her about, don't just think about creating a fork in the road as far as a future career opportunity for yourself. I think of it like a broom. Like, you're on this current path, but what you're enabling is 10, maybe hundreds of different future points and opportunities. It's okay if you don't know what your 5-year future point is going to be, but what you can do is very intentionally enable many different versions of what that future point would be. So that's a diversity of experience. And the other thing that's just absolutely paramount is building relationships. Whether that's a formal mentor or just someone that you check in with sometimes, it can be a colleague, it can be someone with a lot more experience. Reach out, ask questions, engage. If you're going through a hard time, which you will eventually, that becomes your support system. And that support system and those people are the ones that will help get you through and help you make those future decisions for all those awesome opportunities that you've created for yourself.
That's tremendous advice. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show today. Thank you very much, and hopefully we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Mike.